What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Jenks Island podcast, the only NFL podcast year it takes from a washed-up Division III cornerback. I'm your host, Grayson Jenkins, and I'm joined today again by my good friend Ty McGee. We're going to be breaking down our top linebackers in this year's draft class. It's a little bit of a fun class. It's not too it's getting underrated right now. It's not being talked about a lot, but it is a pretty deep class. I think there's a lot of talent within that, within the ranks of these linebackers. And I think you can find some good talent in the deeper rounds in this year's draft class. But anyways, we're going to be breaking down our top five. So we'll give our lists really quick. Ty, let you go first. Who are your top five linebackers?
Yeah, so starting at 5, I have Chris Paul Jr., Carson Schwesinger, Jeffrey Bassa, Demetrius Knight Jr., and then at number 1, Jihaad Campbell.
Yeah, so we have the same top 5. I think, like people are going to say, where's Jalen Walker? But he, for me, he's not on my list just because I think he's kind of like, I can't even put him in a list of a position group because he's not an edge. Like he's not a full edge, but he's not a linebacker either. So he's just kind of his own thing. So he's not in this list either for me. But number 5, I got Jeffrey Bassa. Number 4, Chris Paul Jr. 3, Carson Schwesinger. And 2, Demetrius Knight Jr. and 1, Jihaad Campbell as well. So anyways, number 5 for me is Jeffrey Bassa. But I want to hear your thoughts, Ty, because you have a little bit higher up. So what are your pros for him and what are some cons from him as well?
Yeah, before we jump into Bassa too, I want to address the Jalen Walker stuff, right? I think I kind of tweeted about it today, right? Like he feels like, right, like he was in my top 5 edge guys. Like he feels like more of like an edge outside linebacker. When you turn on the tape, like you don't really see him dropping into coverage as an off-ball linebacker. A lot of times it's like showing blitz in the A gap or dropping off the edge. So I feel like, and he's good edge rusher. He just needs to add a little bit more tools. Like, watch that episode and you'll hear like us break him down a little bit more. But, I think in the NFL, he's going to fit more as an edge than he is an off-ball linebacker just because they haven't really seen the ability to play from that 5 yards, right? Like a lot of it is the blitzing from 5 or playing in the run game more so than true coverage. But back to Jeffrey Bassa, I like him a lot, right? I had him at 3. He was a converted safety halfway through 2021, his freshman year. So that's, an interesting piece for him, right? Like, I was a converted safety, so I'm a big fan of converted safeties into linebackers. Oftentimes those guys are a little bit smaller, right? He's 6'2", 235, so still a bigger dude, right? Not the smallest dude, but looks a little bit more slender on tape. And he runs a 4.63. I think on tape too, he plays a little bit faster than that. But I think on the field, he's constantly communicating. He really seems like a leader, like kind of telling guys to push over, right? Like talking to guys. Like I said, he plays faster than his 40. In the run game, I think, he reads misdirection really well, right? There was a couple times where there was some end arounds that I think, he really, read well, planted back, kind of movement, flowed really well with it. I think he's a good tackler, not a great tackler, but, he just gets guys down. He's not like a very violent tackler, right? I think he's like the prototypical like coverage linebacker that can tackle. I think, like I said, kind of along with the misdirection, right? He's really, really patient. He reads his lanes well in the run game, and then he attacks pretty hard. Sometimes he can be a little too patient, and I wonder if that's, kind of him naturally being a guy that played on the back end where you do have to be a little bit more patient and can't attack right away. But, when you're playing 5 yards from the ball, right, sometimes you just got to attack. I think he looks to like kind of get over guys a little bit too much instead of just hitting a lane sometimes. And I think he's got really good hand and body movement to get off blocks, right? Like he is again, like playing with that DB mentality. It's like, don't let guys get your hands on you. Like, I think he does a really good job of like, not just fighting with his hands, but it's just like the ability to get skinny and get by guys and like kind of Euro pass dudes. Is really, really impressive. In the pass game, I think he's obviously, really, really good in man versus running backs and tight ends. But I think he needs to kind of work on his technique for his receivers. And again, that's probably why he got moved from safety to linebacker. Sometimes you'll see him try to jam guys. He'll whiff guys. I saw like on tape, he tried to jam Emeka Egbuka, who's a really, really good receiver, but, entirely whiffed. And Egbuka, if Will Howard had seen him, was, kind of wide open over the middle of the field. And then other times, right, he's pressing guys. And he kind of just lets them, get a free release and they kind of get a step on him. So, more consistency if he's going to be covering receivers. But for me, like I want to see him covering tight ends in the AFC West, right? If he's got next to Dre Greenlaw, I kind of tweeted that out today, like would be a dream pairing. So I don't think it's too much of a concern. I think he does a really good job, avoiding blocks when blitzing, kind of very similar to the way that he does in the run game, right? Like he uses Euro, he uses his sidestep more often than not, and just really gets skinny and gets by guys with his speed. I think he flows really well in zone coverage, right? Like all the things that you'd want to see from a safety linebacker. He heads on a swivel, right? Like I think sometimes he does open his hips a little quick. And instead of getting hands on guys, very similar to his man techniques, just got to be a little bit more physical. But I think when he is in coverage, he's got a really good break on the ball, really good break on receivers. Right, there was a play where tight end kind of against Purdue, tight end caught a ball closer to the line of scrimmage, and he kind of broke on it, punched it out. So I think he is, for me, LB3 simply because I think he really brings an element to the game where he's like that modern pass coverage linebacker that it's so hard to come by. The stats like don't really jump off the table, right? Only 54 tackles, 23 solo, not really much of a edge rusher or rusher, right? 1.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. But, I think you just turn on the tape, he's locking guys up, but he doesn't, he's not at the ball every time in the run game. Like I said, he is a little too patient, but I think for me, he's like a day 2 guy, or I think maybe like mid to late day 2. I would like Denver, I think they're at pick 42 or something like that. I think it'd be a good spot for him.
Yeah, I think a few of these guys are going to be right in that range, kind of interchangeable for a lot of people, like Bassa, Paul Jr., Schwesinger, even Knight Jr. is falling on a lot of people's boards for whatever reason. For me, I think he was one of the guys that had really solid senior tape, and I think that bounced up his stock a little bit. And then, like you said, his feel and coverage is really something that comes right off the film when you're watching him. One of the cons that I just wanted to bring up for one of the reasons I have him at 5 was just watching his tape against Boise State. When I'm watching it, I feel like playing against a running back like Ashton Jeanty, right? One of the top running backs in this year's class, or the top running back in this year's class. When he was going against him, I noticed at times when Jeanty's going north and south, he didn't necessarily attack Adam. And there was times where he waited for him to make contact. Jeanty made contact with him instead of vice versa. And that allowed Jeanty to get a couple extra yards. And in the NFL, you want your linebackers to go attack if the running back's going north-south. He does a really good job of it going east-west. Like if a running back's going east-west, he's going to go attack and make the tackle. But I want to see a little bit more of that instead of waiting back a little bit when they're going north-south. But that obviously that's just a Boise tape film, and that's Ashton Jeanty. So maybe we wanted to make sure he was able to tackle him for sure. So that's a little bit different.
I think it does go with the patience piece though, right? Like when I saw them most often when he was too patient, it was like inline, inside zone type of run. So I think there is something there for sure.
Yeah. So I'd like to see him kind of improve that. And once you get to the NFL, you get NFL coaches, they can definitely get you coached up on that pretty quickly. Because I think he does have the instincts in both the coverage and I think he, like you said, in misdirection type of plays, I think he's able to read it relatively quickly that he'll be able to get coached up and be solid there in the future. Number 4 for my list is going to be Chris Paul Jr. So for me, I think Chris Paul Jr. is going to be really, really solid in the NFL. I think he's kind of a guy that I saw. I want to say the comp was I forget about it. I forgot who they comped him to, but he's a really solid linebacker all around. He ran a 4.63 40, so he's not like a burner kind of guy. I think he's a really instinctual player with good burst, but he's not a sprinter, if that makes sense. He's not gonna have long range speed, but in quick burst, he is really quick, and I think he has good acceleration. I think he's a very solid tackler, and he has a good awareness when dropping into zone coverage. He's able to kind of drop back and read the quarterback and where they're going to throw in. He had a pick. I'm blanking on who was against, but he watched film. There's a clip of him in an interview. He watched tape specifically on the quarterback and realized, hey, this is a trend that he does. So on this play, I was supposed to blitz, but instead I'm going to drop back and read it the way that I know he will do it. And then he did and got a pick. So he's a good instinctual player, watches tape, and I think that's something that will jump out to a lot of NFL teams. For cons for him, in my opinion, I think he's slightly undersized, right? 6'1", 222 pounds. That's not necessarily going to be, especially with that 4.63 40. And then, like I said, he's not the fastest. And I think he gets stuck at times when trying to navigate blockers. And that might be due to strength. Maybe he's not able to get off of them, force him off with his size, things like that. But I want to see him be able to develop that a little bit more. And then just develop his game in general. If he's able to drop back like he can in college and play that role in the NFL, I think he'll be a really solid linebacker. But I see why people have him lower than Bassa on boards as well. So in my opinion, I think he's number 4, but I could see him being interchanged on this list. Ty, what do you think?
Yeah, he's my LB5, right? And I think the size piece was kind of one of the things that, not the size itself, but I guess the way that it translates onto the field, right? Like, I think a lot of times, right, he kind of goes in there and he flies in, and the guy's always around the ball, right? He really flies, and I love that about him, the fact that he's just moving around and flying to the ball. But he flies in there kind of without a plan for how to, because I think sometimes, right, you watch him against the smaller schools, he flies in there, no one's fast enough to block him, and he makes really good plays. And like when he hits the hole, he hits hard, right? But against some of the bigger schools, he kind of just flies in there without a plan and lets guys get into his frame. I do love to see that, like when he does let guys get into his frame, right? Like he keeps fighting, keeps driving, like he does have like this unlimited motor, right? Like guy just like loves football, like you were talking about, right? Like film junkie, like you could tell he just loves the game and he plays it hard, right? But at the next level, if you're going to run in there and just kind of get locked up, like that's just not, it's not going to work, right? And like that's going to translate into pass rush too, right? Like you're going to run in there, you're going to get locked up a lot. I think even sometimes too, like he would climb really quickly and get sealed off. And you can kind of see like the hesitation when he's climbing too, like, oh shit, like should I drop back? Like should I go in, right? And whether he's successful or not, right? Like I think a lot of times there is that hesitation there. So I think he's just like a little too jumpy, right? Like he could use a little bit of the patience that Boss has, and Boss could use a little bit of the, the go mentality that Chris Paul has. I think he's a really strong tackler, like whether it's a hand tackle, whether it's an arm tackle, whether it's like full body tackle, like his grip is the strength is really, really there, right? It's just like, he's not the biggest dude. He plays hard, but he just doesn't, he's always around the ball, but he's not like making big plays. And, in the pass game, right, like gets hands on guys in the pass game, and he's got a good head swivel. But again, he's just like, it's almost like he's just a step behind a lot, right? Like you want to see him, he flies around, but he's just, like I said, like it kind of doesn't really make sense, right? A guy flies around, and how is he a step behind? But he flies around without a plan and kind of just like misguided. So, I just want to see him to calm down a little bit, right? Like settle down. I think at the second level, if you get a good linebackers coach, just to settle the guy down, I think he could be a really, really good linebacker because, the effort's there and all the intangibles are there. So, LB5 for me, probably day 2, late, right? Like maybe 3rd round, I would say. But, still a very, very good football player, right? And played on a really good defense. Ole Miss's defense is really, really good, and he was a big piece of that. So, and for me, the 4.63 too, like not bad, but also just looks slower than Bassa did on tape too. So, just step behind.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% fair. And then talking about effort, I mean, here's a guy that really brings effort every single play. Carson Schwesinger, my number 3, your number 4 at the line in this linebacker class, a guy that was a walk-on going to college at UCLA. And since I think it was his one single year of starting was last season, and he really balled out, had amazing production, 100 tackles, 100 plus tackles. He led this group in all of the tackles. So I want to hear your thoughts on him, a guy, and I will put this out there, guys. Ty was a linebacker in college, and he coached linebackers a little bit too, so he knows what he's talking about. So Ty, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, the walk-on mentality was like the first thing that came up for me, right? Like when I heard, them kind of talking about him being a walk-on, like it shows up on tape, right? The guy flies around. He's playing special teams. Like at the worst, I think this guy could be a Pro Bowl special team, like caliber type player, right? He blocked a punt, even though got called back because of a face mask on one of his teammates, right? Like not his fault, but just the, I mean, and none of these other guys, right? You saw them on punt block, right? There was not a single tape of them, piece of tape of them on punt block. So you love to see that, right? Like high effort guy. He's clearly like the entire defense, right? 136 tackles, 90 solo tackles, 4 sacks, a forced fumble, 2 picks. Like dude is everywhere on tape, right? And UCLA's defense kind of took a step down this past year. Their defensive coordinator left, right? He went to USC. But this dude was just everywhere, right? Like flies around. He's not a bad tackler. I'll say this. I think he's a good tackler, but the technique is really, really poor, right? He's constantly falling to his knees. I want to see the guy stay on his feet, right? And like, again, you can see on the tape, like why he was a walk-on, right? Like he probably had a lot of growing to do, and he probably still has a lot of growing to do, right? And like, you want to see that at the next level because you're not going to tackle Derrick Henry fall into your legs, right? You might be able to tackle a guy from Minnesota or a guy from Wisconsin, fall into your knees, but not these top tier, bigger backs. And he just climbs a little bit too quickly at times too, right? Like very similar to Chris Paul. I think he's climbing, and he gets sailed off, and it's way too fast, right? Just be a little bit patient. Like he has, all the efforts there and everything you want to see out of a linebacker, but it's just calm down, take a breath, right? Like take a little hop step and click your heels, like, just calm down, right? And so I think in the run game, the effort's there, but you just got to slow down. In the pass game, I think, he's got really good hit. I think this is probably the strength of his game, honestly. He's got really good hit flipping coverage. There was a piece of tape where he, double hip flip and he gets an interception, right? Like he's a very fluid mover, reads the field very well in zone. He flies downhill, when he's blitzing, right? He uses change of speed. I love to see that, right? Like he's not the biggest guy. So, kind of use your speed to your advantage, right? You kind of use that change of speed to beat guys in the pass rush. He's honestly a really good pass rusher too, just because he plays with so much effort, right? It's a little bit different in the run game where you do have to be more patient. Like you can kind of be a bat out of hell, in the pass rush game. I think, he's probably, for me, it kind of reminds me a lot of Justin Strnad, right? Like a Broncos linebacker for 4 years. Dude just played on special teams, didn't get a single snap on defense, really. Is a really good pass coverage linebacker. That was why we took him out of Wake Forest. And then finally got a shot this past year, really showed up, played with a lot of effort, was good in pass coverage, and he's continued to be a special teams guy. And we brought him back this year, and he's probably going to go back to being a special teams guy for us and the spot linebacker. Like, this guy probably, I think he'll go a little bit higher than Chris Paul because he does have that like ability, like, he can be a special teams guy, and he plays with, and I think he's a little bit better in pass coverage. But he's just got I think he still has a lot of growing to do, right? He's not even the biggest guy either, right? 6'2", 225. The 4.7 is a little like, surprising because he does play with so much energy, effort, and flies around all the time. He has all the mental stuff, right? Like all that stuff is there. It's just like getting him to slow down a little bit, right? Better form tackling, like put on a little bit more weight because he has the ability to add some more weight to his frame. But I think he could be a really good football player. It's just he needs more time.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you brought up his tackling form because that's my biggest knock for him is he doesn't bring the boom, which is what you want. Like he doesn't have power behind his tackles. Like he's getting guys down, but like you said, he's dropping to his legs immediately when he's making contact. He's getting them down, but they're getting an extra yard or two, and he's not really making hard contact with these guys, which, like you said, Derrick Henry is not going to go down to that. He's going to keep churning for another 10 yards after that contact. But like you said, I think his biggest pro that a lot of NFL teams I think are going to take into account is that he can play special teams. And that's one thing I mentioned as in my notes as well, as I think like for the Saints, that's one of the things they look for a lot in the guys they're drafting is if they're not immediate starters, can they go make immediate impacts on special teams? And I'm sure a lot more teams look at that, but I know the Saints do especially. So for a guy like him, that is an immediate thing to bump him up the draft boards, him going balls to the wall every single play on special teams or defense, no matter what. He said in an interview, he models his game after Luke Kuechly and Fred Warner. That's just a random note, but that's something at least you see that he is trying to grow to be one of those kind of great players in the league. And like you said, he is still pretty raw. I think the biggest thing for him, in my opinion, that I really liked was his dropping back in his own coverage, right? He's not going to be a man coverage great. I don't think, because he hasn't shown that in college, but when he drops back in his own coverage, like you said, his hips, being able to turn his hips really quickly, flip his hips and make plays, I think that's going to be a really good opportunity for him in the NFL. Moving on to number 2, I got Demetrius Knight Jr. Both of us have the same number 2 and number 1. I think it's pretty much consensus at this point in time with most mock drafters, things like that. But Demetrius Knight Jr. is 6'2", 235 out of South Carolina, according to the NFL Combine Tracker or whatever. He ran a 4.58 40 and had a 8.52 RAS, which is both of those numbers are really, really solid. For me, I think he is a heat-seeking missile, right? Like he kind of is. That's what he is in his gameplay. North-south speed is absolutely legit. He's always seems to be getting the ball in every single play. He has a nose for the football. I like the way he doesn't feel the need to guess and does a solid job of diagnosing plays efficiently. And I love the way he's able to avoid blockers and keep himself in the play. He seems to be able to go side to side relatively well and avoid blockers that way. The cons, I think his lateral quickness, when like trying to go make a tackle laterally, things like that could improve. He's good at north-south, east to west. I want to see him improve a little bit. And I think he needs to improve his man-to-man coverage, which is something that, I think not all of these guys are going to be great at, but for a guy that number 2 linebacker in this class, I think that's really something that he needs to work on. But I think he's going to be a very solid inside linebacker in this class, and I think in the NFL in the future for him. So what are your thoughts, Ty?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I tweeted this out today, like turning on his tape, the more and more I watched, like fell in love with it. And it was like old school mean and modern day speed is the way that I would describe Demetrius Knight. Like, dude is, like you said, he's a rocket. Like, he will kill you, but he flies around, right? 4.58 for a bigger dude, 245. I mean, that's pretty damn big running to 4.58. So that's pretty scary seeing that run around. In the run game, I think, I see your point out about the East and the West, right? Like, he's not the quickest dude laterally, but I think he flows to the ball really, really well, which helps him with his, lateral quickness issues, I guess, if you want to say, right? Like, he reads things well, he flows, and he just boom, he's kind of down. He makes it almost where he doesn't have to go east and west. He more so has to go north and south on a good angle. So really, really love to see that. And then, beating blockers with a ton of power and hand fight, right? Like, he just flies into dudes, throws them off with his hands, right? Like, he's a monster. He's a hard tackler, right? Like, just, puts his body into dudes and wants to looks like he wants to hurt them all the time, right? Like, he is like that's why I say, like, old school mean. Like, he just looks like he wants to hurt you. Like those guys talk about, Ray Lewis, guys like that. I think he's got really, really good closing speed, whether that's in the run game or in coverage, right? Like, I think he flies on great angles. His tackle angles are to me, tackle angles and run fits are like perfect, right? Like, I don't think he ever over pursues. I don't think he ever I think the angles are always like, I don't know, man. That's what I'm saying. Like, I fell in love with him. Like, when I saw the run fits and the tackle angles on a 45-degree angle, I was like, man, like, this guy is, he's legit, right? And I think, sometimes he does play a little bit high, right? I think I want to see him, bend a little bit more because, guys will get into him, right? That's kind of what we talked about with some of these other guys earlier, right? Like, play low. You don't want to fly in there. And he's stronger than any of the other linebackers we talked about. So it's not much of a problem because he just beats the shit out of guys. But, still, there's bigger guys in the NFL. Don't want to see guys get up inside of you and kind of control you. I think too, like, because he does play so hard, so fast, he needs to be able to like swivel his head a little bit more when he's reading run and like find blockers. There was a couple times where like I would see him, kind of creep up as he's flowing, and maybe this is part of him like kind of compensating for the lack of lateral quickness, but he's like flowing. And then guys just kind of get up on him, and he didn't see an offensive lineman, but he was in perfect position to make a tackle, but the guy just got up in him, right? So I think want to see him just kind of swivel the head a little bit more in the run game. He does a really good job of that in the pass game, I think, in zone coverage, right? He kind of head on a swivel, moves really well, closing speed's great. Like you said, not a lot of man reps, but I think you're not going to ask a guy that's 245 pounds to go out there and cover a wide receiver like you are Jeffrey Bassa, right? Like, he'll cover a tight end every now and then, but probably mostly play in zone.
Exactly.
And just to go with the power too, there was a play where I think it was Jackson Arnold was running, and dude just came in from behind, crazy powerful peanut punch. Like, that ball flew like 3 yards. I mean, so every part of this guy's game is just power, and then he beats you with a little bit of speed too. So, I was talking to Jenks earlier today, like watching Knight and watching Bassa. I think they're more NFL ready players than the guy we're about to talk about, strictly because I think they're, every part of their game is pretty well-rounded and just is more ready to just go into a team and contribute right away. We'll talk about Jihaad Campbell, but Demetrius Knight especially, I have him like, this might be crazy, but I think he could be a late day one guy. Like, that's how much I fell in love with his tape today.
Yeah. No. And I want to talk about that really quick because you said day one, and like when I'm doing mock drafts, he fell all the way into late day two, like late third round on PFF. And I'm like, this is a guy that I think could go anywhere from, like you said, late round one all the way through late round 3, because his tape is good, but it's just kind of the value of linebackers, right? We see that linebacker position go undervalued in the draft constantly, and I think that's something that I don't know if it's just because you can relatively get a good vet for cheap at the linebacker position, so maybe people just don't value it that much. But I think a guy like this, when you can get him in the second round, I think that would be really great value for a guy like Demetrius Knight.
If Denver could get him and put him next to Dre Greenlaw, I mean, this guy might be a 10-year NFL starter, right? Like, he might come in and start right away. I think if you get him there in the middle of the second round, like, that's an insane steal, because he's a late first round value to me, just based on like all the intangibles. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even crazy to think about, because a guy we're talking about so highly isn't the number one linebacker in his class. That title goes to Jihaad Campbell, a guy that is an absolute athletic freak. 4.5, 240, a 9.85 RAS score. A guy that when you watch him on tape, you see him running around the field, and it's like you're watching an alien. 6'3", and he's you see him at the linebacker position. He almost kind of looks like like he has like the athleticism of a corner almost. It feels like he's just kind of like the way he can bend, turn, flip his hips, whatever he needs to do, he can do it. And so when I'm watching his tape, I mean, I think immediately he's the linebacker one, just because of athleticism alone and the potential. But I want to hear your thoughts, Ty, really getting into him and breaking him down. I mean, this is a guy that can do absolutely anything. You can line up on the D line, you can line up in the box. You can do whatever you need. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I mean, the athleticism right away pops off the tape, right? And I think, like, when you look at 119 tackles, 55 solo tackles, like, half of his like, that's like 60 assisted tackles, right? Like, that just shows how much this guy is flying to the ball, right? Like, he's everywhere. He might not be the first guy there, but it's probably because he's 15 yards away from the ball and flying in and making a tackle. So for me, like, freak athlete, ideal size, like, high motor, right? Like, I don't think we mentioned size, 6'3", 244. Like, that is an extra inch. He's got really long arms. He's just as big as Demetrius Knight, right? Like, all of the potential of the body and the mentality is there. Like, the guy just plays pissed off too. For me, like, very similar tenacity to Abdul Carter. Like, that was what I thought when I first turned on the tape and, like, was kind of watching through and through. I was like, man, like, I mean, maybe it's the number 11, right? But it's just like the both of them play with the same level of tenacity, the same motor, the same just like ability to fly around. They're both longer guys, right? Like, their frames are very similar. So that was just like, kind of a tenacity comp for me, not necessarily a player comp. But
yeah,
I think in the run game, right, like, he's a freak, right? 119 tackles. He reads run lanes really, really well, attacks them immediately. I think, a lot of these guys, right, we kind of talked about, do they attack it well? Every time he attacks the run lane, it's a tackle in the backfield, right? Like, the dude is just flying around. Insane strong grip, like, doesn't miss tackles. He just, like, wraps dudes up, hugs them, throws them around. Like, he's just a vicious player. I think in the pass game, it's probably where he needs the most work, right? Like, I think a lot of times, and this is why I say Demetrius Knight and Jeffrey Bassa are more ready to play right away guys. He just relies on his athleticism. I think, like, in the screen game, sometimes he has bad pursuit angles, and, like, the athleticism makes up for it because he can quick turn and just grip guys and throw them down. But it's like, does that translate into the pros? Like, and it's almost like he doesn't know. And I think it's fixable, right? It's just teaching him, where is your help? Because sometimes I would see, corner and an outside linebacker being blocked, and a safety's running, screaming down the lane there, right, to make a tackle on the inside. And he is supposed to be coming, inside out on those guys. And instead, he's like taking the middle angle and kind of over pursuing. So, just want to see, like, sit him down, right? Like, and that could just be coaching, right? Sit him down. If he ends up in a really good team, put him with Fred Warner, right? He's going to understand angles and tackle pursuit and all that stuff a hell of a lot better. I think same in zone coverage, right? Like, his eyes aren't great. I think a lot of times he's staring at the quarterback when he makes gets interceptions. Like, watch the Georgia game, right? Like, when Carson Beck threw him that interception, like, he was just staring at Beck, and I don't know what the hell Beck was throwing. It was an awful throw.
He was being Carson Beck, that's all.
Yeah, he's being Carson Beck, right? Like, again, can rely on his athleticism to fly, because then you'll turn on the tape and you see him against Kyron Lacy in coverage, and he's locking him up, and he's just, like, flying to the ball and, like, again, relying on his athleticism that helps him. It's honestly going to help him a lot in man. I think right away he'll be a really good man coverage linebacker, which a lot of these guys weren't fantastic at because he's so damn athletic that, like, even if he doesn't have the best technique, no one's going to run away from him. But, I think he's a great blitzer. It's very similar. The blitzing to me from 5 is very similar to, like, how well do you play in the run game? It's just like, can you find the lanes? How patient are you? Like, how hard do you hit it? And all those things are there for him. And when he is blitzing, I think he redirects really well at the rollout. I think it was against LSU. Garrett Nussmeier rolled out.
Yeah, it was.
He's on a blitz and he redirects and he gets around and he swats the ball down. Obviously a very, very freak athlete. You mentioned the edge rusher. I don't think he's a great edge rusher, and I don't think teams.
It's his athleticism in college that
I don't think teams should play him on the edge, right? We talked about Jalen Walker, like teams should play him on the edge. Mm-hmm. He goes in. I don't think he has any plan. I think
he's just more athletic. That's all it is.
Exactly. He just flies up the field, and you kind of see it too, like against Will Campbell. Like, he did get locked up. Like, Campbell like had him absolutely, in a straitjacket. The only sack he had against Will was when Nussmeier like spun out into it, and Will Campbell had him 7 yards in the backfield. So, that's not really Will Campbell's fault. Like, going back to our O-line talk, right? Like, take that sack off the board because Garrett Nussmeier slipped into it. So, I think it's athleticism with him, and he just needs to end up in a good situation to kind of refine his skills, his eyes in the pass game, his pursuit angles. Like, a lot of it is eyes, right? Eyes and knowing who's around you, right? Like, in the pass game, find work, like, kind of, it just takes a little bit of a head swivel to help like who's coming with, right? And part of that is probably knowing, what the guy next to you is doing or what the guy behind you is doing, right? Having, the know of what everyone else is doing in coverage. So you're like, okay, these are my zones and these are the things that could be coming at me. And same thing in the pursuit angles, right? Knowing what other guys are doing what so that you know what angle to take. So it's interesting that it doesn't show up in the screen game because he obviously does a really, really great job inside the tackles on it. But I think outside the tackles, things are a little less predictable, right? Like, it's harder to read. There's less people there. So I think it's all really workable for him. He's obviously has all the athleticism, and that's why he's the one. Like, and most guys, when you say, okay, like Shamar Stewart, right? He was an R1 and it was a freak athlete. It didn't really show up on tape as much because he wasn't getting through with like the stats. Like, this guy's a freak athlete and his stats are insane. He's an insane, run linebacker. He just needs a little bit more work in the pass game with technique, right? It's just refining the technique for me. And he's a top 20 guy for me.
Yeah, no, he 100% is. He's one of my favorite defensive prospects in this class. Obviously, outside of the obvious top 10 picks with Carter, Hunter, and Graham. If Hunter is a defensive, whatever they make him, whoever picks him. Yeah. But I think real quick, I just want to say I'm so happy that Hammer wasn't here for the Eddie Lacy, Kyron Lacy mix-up because he was started having flashbacks and got into a weird Packers conversation. But anyways, Jihaad Campbell, I think, like you said, he's extremely versatile, ridiculously athletic, and I think he has the prototypical size that NFL teams are looking for. And if he can bulk up even a little bit more, the guy's can be a dog. And I think for me, the one pro that you haven't you got into, but I wanted to kind of just make real quick is that he has the motor of a Lamborghini Revuelto, which is like the highest horsepower Lamborghini there is, because the guy is absolutely going nuts every single play and is always trying to there's a play I think it was against Georgia. It was a screen to the left side of the offense and he chases it down 30 yards down the field. So the guy is always trying to make a play. But like you said, I think he's a little bit more raw. And I think he's overly aggressive and he takes himself out of the play at times just because of his athleticism. He's going to be sprinting in because he thinks he can go make a play. And then either he read it wrong or he over pursued or took the wrong angle. Things like that takes him a little bit out of the play. And I think he's not the most powerful tackler. Like you said, he can wrap a guy up and throw him on the ground, but he's not putting his body into the guy's paws, but he's not really just making really powerful contact, which is what you want to see in the NFL. So we'll see how that develops as well. I think he'll be able to do that perfectly fine. But just a quick note, because you already, like you said, you've been killing it with the linebacker coverage, and I think he kind of covered all the boxes for them. With him, I think one of the really interesting things is where he's going to go in the draft, right? Because I see mock drafts, him falling all the way to the Eagles at 32, which would be it would kill me on the inside if he falls to the Eagles somehow. But I could see him going to the Saints even at 9 if the Saints really, really fall in love with him and then go, hey, we want a linebacker, a guy that can do everything on defense, whatever. He could go there. I don't think that happens. I think we go offensive player. But I'm just saying for range, he could go absolutely anywhere in that first round. I'm really interested to see where he goes. What would be the team that would be the best fit for him, in your opinion?
The 49ers, right? Like they lose Greenlaw. I think it's tough to say, but I think Greenlaw is better in coverage. But you watch the way that Drew Greenlaw flies around, very, very similar to Jihaad Campbell. Like both freak athletes that fly to the ball, have an unlimited motor, kind of just play pissed off and ragged all year round. Like I think put him next to Fred Warner, I think that was something that they've been missing is that Greenlaw, right? Because he had the Achilles injury and then like kind of came back late. And now they lose him in free agency, right? Like I think if they were in a position that they felt, Will Campbell's off the board and Armand Membu's off the board and they're not that confident in Josh Simmons, I think Will Campbell would be, I just imagine him next to Fred Warner. And like, that is, that's a nightmare duo for a lot of defense or for a lot of offenses. So for me, it's San Francisco.
Yeah, I think Jihaad Campbell, if you just give Warner the time to mentor him even, because like you said, he's still a little bit raw, but you get Fred Warner to coach him up, this guy could become an all-pro type of talent very, very quickly.
He could be the best linebacker in the league.
Yeah. With his athleticism, he can easily do it. And if you just give him a good team and a good location where he doesn't have to be the immediate do-it-all kind of guy, and he can be next to Fred Warner and learn from him, he could really develop.
Don't put him in Atlanta. That's my worst spot for him. I'm being very serious. I don't want to see him in Atlanta because I don't think they have a good enough defense.
Yeah.
I think he'd have to be the do-it-all guy, right? Another team would be Tampa. Tampa would be good because they have a lot of vets, but I think Atlanta would be really, really bad for him.
Yeah, like I say, please go to Atlanta, right? Because I would be like, yeah, the Falcons wouldn't know how to coach him. But then he could also turn into a freak in Atlanta somehow, and then like he'd terrorize the Saints. So I won't say anything regarding him to Atlanta, but like you said, I don't think Atlanta's a good spot for a defensive rookie in that sort of situation at this time because they like you said, they don't have the best vets around him. He would have to kind of do a little bit of everything. And I think they lost. Jesse Bates is still a free agent, I want to say. I think he's
Justin Simmons.
Yeah, one of their safeties. Yeah, so they're losing them, so they got to get a safety in this draft class. We'll see what they do in the draft as well. But anyways, that'll do it for this episode. Ty, do you have any closing thoughts or anything before we do the outro?
No, this was just awesome. I love getting to the linebackers. Like today was, we've gotten to a lot of position groups. This was by far my favorite one. So, loved it.
That's why I really was trying to let you break it all down a lot more because I know that you as a linebacker and as a guy who coached them, like you truly know the ins and outs and you really love everything linebacker. So I was like, I gotta let Ty go all out on this one. But anyways, I think next week we have receivers. That'll be a fun breakdown.
Might get Ned on for that one too.
Yeah, we can get Ned on. We'll see what he's doing. He's a little bit of a wild card when we try to get him on.
He expressed interest.
Yeah, so we'll get Ned on. That'll be exciting for all you guys out there. Ned, I just want to say, Ned was like, I think we had on first year we started the podcast, and he had the most watched episode for a long, long time because we talked about Sam Howell. And like, I don't know who tuned into that, but it must have been a really funny conversation considering how the Sam Howell situation played out in Washington. Anyways, that'll do it for our episode. You guys know where to check us out on social media and wherever you get your podcast at Jenks Island. And we will see you guys next week. We're breaking down some receivers.